Welcome to Engaging ESG, where we consider, challenge, and celebrate the evolving world of environmental, social, and governance communications, all in an increasingly complex landscape. I'm Jennifer Owens, marketing executive and consultant.
And I'm Katie Callens, Global Head of Sustainability at Adobe. For Season 4, we're once again talking with climate leaders who are shaping the present and future of sustainability messaging. From connecting with stakeholders to crafting compelling impact stories, we're uncovering the strategies that worked and learning from those that didn't.
Whether you're a seasoned pro or new to the field, you'll find practical tips and insights in every episode.
And whether you're working on your first sustainability report or reimagining your organization's climate narrative, these conversations will help you navigate the complexities of ESG communications. Let's get started.
Hello, Katie.
Hi, Jen. Nice to see you and some of our return guests today.
Oh, today we are bringing back two of our most requested guests. And honestly, what's been happening in the sustainability job market, it's a conversation that could not be more timely.
Yes, some of you might remember our Season 3 episode with Acre. It was one of our most listened to. And it really tells you how much this community cares about this question around talent. And I think as all of us are trying to figure out how do we fit into this ever-changing talent market, quite a bit has changed since we last talked. So we're really glad to have the opportunity to gather again.
Me too. So let's get right at it. I am very happy to welcome back Richard Kent, Principal Consultant at Acre, the global leader in sustainability recruitment. He brings more than 12 years of experience recruiting senior technology and sustainability executives. And prior to Acre, he cut his teeth recruiting go-to-market and engineering leaders for high-growth software startups, venture firms, and incubators. All the world that I've traversed in my past. But over the past 4.5 years at Acre, he has supported executive searches across sustainable finance, clean tech, and corporate sustainability before focusing on leadership roles at the intersection of sustainability and tech with a focus on SaaS and ag tech. And then we're also joined by Catherine Harris, Acre's Executive Director of Sustainable Business Americas. She brings more than 15 years of experience recruiting senior sustainability executives and board members. She's been based in New York for more than 7 years, recruiting for Fortune 500 corporations and related nonprofits at the C-suite level. She's also a board member of Wild Survivors, a nonprofit that works to reduce human-elephant conflict in Tanzania. So that is a lot. And thank you, Richard and Catherine. Thank you for joining us at Engaging ESG.
It's a pleasure.
Excited to be back.
Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. So let's jump right in and maybe talk a little bit about feelings. This can be as much of a therapy session as well as a info session. So I think everyone listening knows that 2025 was particularly brutal. We saw sustainability teams cut at peer companies like Southwest, Nike, S&P Global, to not name a dozen others. We're now in spring 2026. From your vantage point, is this pullback from sustainability itself, or would you say something more structural happening in how companies are organizing their work?
Yeah, I can try and tackle that one first if you like. I wouldn't say that it's a pullback necessarily at all. I think the work is far from disappearing. We know that climate risk still has to be assessed, human rights due diligence still has to happen, and reporting has to be accurate, stand up to audit. All that still remains. I think what's changing perhaps is just who might be accountable for that and how close that accountability sits to the core of the business. So at a time where we know there's budgetary pressures, there's challenges economically, there's geopolitical issues, et cetera, different administration, this accelerates this need for businesses to think about how do we protect the roles that sit closest to revenue and risk and compliance and operations. And so I describe it more as a structural shift where there's a move of some of these positions into the finance or legal or procurement, supply chain, internal audit worlds. Boards are thinking increasingly about what risks they need to mitigate and what value this function is protecting. So that's the shift or the move, I would say, less pure sustainability roles per se, particularly at the top, which we can touch on in a minute. So it looks like cuts from the outside, but I think it's more about consolidation and integration. And I should also add, this very much applies to sustainability, but we're also seeing that generally across all industries and professions. Post-COVID, there has been a contraction in hiring, generally speaking.
Yeah, I agree with Catherine. I feel like in times like this of unpredictability, you see organizations, I guess, taking austerity measures and tightening the belts. And while we're seeing large cuts in sustainability teams, like you just mentioned, this is happening across the board at senior director and VP levels. And so it's not just sustainability. I do think, though, we can't sort of leave out the fact that there are organizations stepping back their externally communicated commitments around sustainability. Folks don't want to be in the crosshairs of certain activists or organizations. We're also seeing changing standards around reporting and those expectations. So there's a lot of question around like, what do we build when we don't really know when and what we're going to have to do? Look at the inbound, I guess a year or two ago, the inbound SEC regulations, Omnibus was about to come out. And now we've seen a lot of that's been pushed down the road. So that has sort of slowed some commitments, changed priorities for sure. But I also think that it's worth noting that at least here in North America, we're at an interesting time in our sustainability journey from a corporate perspective. A lot of companies were getting into this 5, 7, 10 years ago, maybe more recently, but that early work around building a roadmap, getting foundations laid has kind of been done for a lot of these companies. And so maybe it's a natural time for them to start transitioning to think about, how do we operationalize this? How do we drive this out into the business rather than having a big sustainability team? It's more about how do we make this embedded in the way we do procurement and the way we operate. And so we're seeing, I think personally, maybe it's a silver lining there. I think it's a natural point where that needed to happen anyways.
Catherine, you had flagged earlier when we were talking about this episode, a report from Futera, Ride the Waves, which we will link in the show notes, but it was tracking these cycles of sustainability interest going back to the 1960s. And that data suggests that we won't see this down wave reverse until 2027. I like the point, Richard. It's just not the sustainability people be getting hit. It's all of us. But then you do the intersection of this wave. And so I'm wondering if you think this timetable, is that what you're seeing from your vantage point?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's true. Sustainability hiring has always moved in cycles, and it's usually triggered by something, whether that's Rana Plaza or a reputational crisis or a new piece of legislation that leads to sudden investment, growth in headcount, and then you'll see apathy sort of kick in or some kind of backlash, which leads to consolidation. And so it goes, and so it goes. And the Waves report talks a little bit about that. I think in practice, to the point Richard made as well, it means we're seeing this juncture less new or net new big sort of heads of sustainability coming into post, a lot more scrutiny on ROI and cost and clarity around mandate. And we're also seeing in this sort of wave or trough, you could say, longer hiring cycles. We're seeing a lot of that right now, a lot more cautious decision making. Our processes are taking twice the length of time, I would say, than they normally do. And some roles are being paused or reshaped, just quietly absorbed into other functions. So it's definitely an interesting time in terms of what we're seeing right now. I think why 2027 makes sense is we know that this legislation is still coming down the pike, whether that's CSRD or EUDR or human rights disclosure and that sort of thing. It's going to be live, audited, and enforced. And 2027, by then, organizations will have gone hopefully through at least one, if not two, of those reporting cycles, and they'll have felt the pain. They'll realize where their gaps might be, and they would hopefully then understand or recognize where it's been under-resourced and where they might need someone to head things up and or to add further headcount. So I think this is a time of consolidation, but we will see just as things play out. And maybe it won't necessarily turn to this sort of large centralized sustainability team, as Richard said as well. You know, we probably won't go back to what we've known over the last decade or more. I think it will shift more into regulatory focus and operationalization of the strategy and ideating that's been taking place over the last 10 years. at that point, it'll be much more about ESG data and assurance and supply chain risk, traceability, and that sort of thing. So the timing feels right. 2027, what it looks like, I think will be very different, a bit more disciplined, a bit less aspirational, dare I say, and much more tightly aligned with governance and risk and accountability and implementation.
What is the average timeline? You said it's been double, and I don't know if that's proprietary information, but just at like a high level, I think I'd be curious to know.
That's a great question. We usually say 4 to 6 weeks of search. That's generally, and between us, we might find a candidate in the first week, but we still have to go through a comprehensive process where, 4 to 6 weeks later, we'll have a nice sort of shortlist to present. But now, I'd say in the last 6 months, it's kind of stretched to 8 weeks as a process. This last process I've just been running has been a matter of months, not weeks. We're just hearing a lot of that across not just the US business, but our business globally. Just a lot of delays, and decision making is just much tougher. And I think our clients are just having to really scratch their heads and think about what they really want. And that's sort of materially changing just from the time that we start
Right.
to when we get to your average shortlisting time.
Right. And that's nothing to say for like what the business is going through. I'll share at Adobe, we updated our mission as a company at the beginning of the year. So that's been like a great transformation. Our mission is now we empower everyone to create, but then you have every other team struggling to understand, okay, how do we integrate that into our functions? So I imagine also part of this quick changing environment is organizations strategically shifting, and then the role needs shift and just kind of down the pike like that.
Yeah, there's a few instances where M&A has come to play as well, where a team will be charged with consolidating sustainability targets for the two entities, and things change. Or there might be an acquisition where new team members are coming in, and that again shifts the focus or the direction that they might be going in. So that can have a really massive impact.
It goes without saying that hiring is expensive. You bring on somebody, you don't want to make a mistake. And in times of, like I mentioned before, in times of austerity, when CFOs are tentative about how many people they want to add to headcount, folks are more careful with their hiring as well. They'll bring in additional interviewers. They'll add extra steps that we might not have done a year ago, 2 years ago. And that just, that extends the timeline as well.
That makes sense.
Well, LinkedIn had the Green Skills Report, and they said that they had found that the majority of green hires were going into non-green job titles. And so is that a reflection of this trend that you guys are talking about, where it's becoming a layer across functions rather than a standalone role? Do you see that, Richard?
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying, right? Whereas before a company might have had 20, 30, 40 people on their sustainability team, now they're making these core requirements of the behavior of the business, and they've established the reporting mechanism, the governance mechanism for that. They don't need people to come in and manage the day-to-day. So these things are happening at the operational level rather than on the team. With that being said, it's an interesting time because while we're seeing high-level executives being cut with these measures, they're being replaced by junior level folks that are focused on the day-to-day of the job. So it's almost a shift down as well. So we're still seeing a lot of jobs on LinkedIn, for example, but they're usually at like manager level, maybe director, but that's where I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that having hired a lot of junior people, there is this mindset that your boss will come to you and say, well, can't you find the unicorn? The 22-year-old new graduate who also has the skills of a 20-year veteran and an MBA, and also can teach us about tech. And I have often had that conversation where I'm like, no, you realize you're hiring someone with no experience. We're going to upskill them as they come for hiring. I'm not surprised that you would look for everything in a box of donuts when you're trying to hire these lower skills.
I think it's fair. We all want to go to the moon for free, but
yes.
Sometimes we have to bring ourselves back
we
down.
We actually do, need to hire at that level.
You did ask about job title, though, as well. And I think that's an interesting question. I know that with those shifts that we're seeing, it's probably quite sage to start thinking about how you position yourself in this market in terms of being a sustainability leader, even at managerial level, the person who's owning sustainability, but that you're also the person that's helping the business to get through these reporting cycles without any nasty surprises, or to reduce supply chain risk, or to improve data quality. I mean, all of these things don't mention the word sustainability, but they're all impacts that you can make that will go down well with the senior leadership team and the board as well. So anything that you can do to build that in and future-proof yourself at a time when, like I said earlier, we're thinking much more about risk and resilience and the value that you add to the business, and framing your role in that way can do nothing but good. So your job title, that we often hear people ask about whether they should be rethinking their job title, and I would always support that idea, particularly if it brings you closer to those business functions that we've talked about. So you might be director of supply chain risk or resilience, or you might be responsible sourcing director. So again, no mention of sustainability, but something that actually means something to the business in real and material terms.
So we've been talking about the structural shifts and the headwinds, but I want to pause for a second because I know there are people listening who are pretty demoralized right now. Is there anything you're seeing day to day that's actually giving you hope, or any green shoots that might not be making the headlines, but are feeling meaningful to you?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And very much so. I mean, I know that it is a tough time right now, but equally we're seeing some movement. Even in the last couple of weeks, I would say things have been picking up. We are seeing a couple of roles coming into our business that, to my earlier point, have been a little bit more niche, for example, in human rights, with a clear focus on that, or a clear focus on EPR. So there's definitely more activity in those specialist areas. And then another point to make perhaps is I've been in conversation with a few CSOs of late, and I know they in turn have been a little bit anxious perhaps, and wondering about their role and having to justify their role. And one individual was commenting on the fact that they hadn't been asked to join any investor meetings this year so far, and we were worried that that might be a reflection of the importance of the role in the business. And then, sure enough, in the last 10 days, they had 2 messages saying, could you please join this investor call right now? And they ended up spending probably a large portion of the time on the call talking about the work that they were doing in sustainability. So I think there's definitely a lot of talk about what's going on or not going on, but underneath all of that, there's still a hell of a lot of work happening. There's a lot of activity. I'm hearing about people's roles expanding to cover compliance and to cover other areas that businesses are worried about. So don't believe the hype, I suppose, is what I would say. Stay positive, and anything that we're seeing right now, we talked about maybe things turning around in 27, 28. I can say that in one breath, but in the next breath, I can also say, I don't know what's down the pike. And tomorrow I might get 2 phone calls from clients saying that they're looking to fill roles. So things can turn on a dime in this industry. So yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. We just have to keep an open mind.
I got to say, I completely agree in that being in this world, I am getting in the world of being a contract consultant, I'm doing fine because the work is continuing. So
Right.
if there's a pullback on the full-time role, they still need work to do. So that's how it manifests for me. So
Right.
what do you think, Richard?
I think Catherine said it perfectly. And that point that the work still needs to get done is definitely a theme. In terms of green shoots for me, I can't remember if I mentioned this already, but I recently went to a really cool thing here in Nashville. There was a pitch session where a bunch of ag tech startups came together with farmers, investors, et cetera, bringing new ideas from like pre-seed all the way through to like scale stage. And it just reassured me that there are really smart people and really cool people that are out here still trying to solve these problems, get the work done. There's still organizations out there that are trying to work with these startups to solve their problems, whether that's scope 3, in-setting issues in the ag supply chain. So just, I came out of that meeting with a lot of energy, which was great.
The other quick point to make is I've spoken to a few people post Greenbiz, and the reports on the ground are that everyone went in feeling a little bit morose, and that there was a general, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, energy of just sort of concern, negativity. But by the end, everyone was in a totally different mindset, upbeat, and feeling really positive about what's going on. And in part, that's due to being part of a community, which we've talked about, I'm sure, at some point, and the importance of sharing with each other, but also hearing stories of what is actually going on in real terms, people talking about the work that they're continuing to do, that nothing has changed. So, yeah, I think that was also a very positive point I wanted to make.
Yeah, what I hear you saying there is a lot around agility and thinking about the framing of your work. And I think that actually leads very nicely into another question that I had, but really to position us and to ground us into the open searches that you have right now, understanding where is the demand? Are you seeing sectors, company types, or specific skill sets that are actively hiring, maybe while others have pulled back? Any trends there?
I think such a broad aperture, right? I think you look at the trends in the marketplace that are specifically related to sustainability right now. One of those is data warehouses. Anything related to developing those, procurement of energy, energy efficiency, resilience around that. There's a lot happening there. You look at, I think the other trends I'm seeing is as companies are stepping away maybe from large or sort of outspoken external commitments around decarbonization or voluntary carbon markets and stuff like that, we're seeing more of a focus on traceable, transparent, resilient supply chains, operation efficiency. Just kind of thinking out loud here. Catherine, would you like to step in?
Where are we all getting our next job is what
Yeah,
the question
exactly.
is
Oh,
on the
God.
table, please.
Where's my crystal ball? Just give me a second. Look, Richard and I both focus quite squarely in the same area around consumer goods, food and ag. I do a lot of work in apparel as well. And the sectors, I think they've always been slightly, particularly apparel, actually ahead of the curve, very much exposed in so many ways around forced labor and human rights and traceability, and packaging increasingly so. We're looking at EPR coming on. I think coming out of
Huge.
California is going to be massive for all these CPG firms. Scope 3 has not gone away. EU regulation's still there. Deforestation, EUDR. All these acronyms that we throw around, they haven't gone away, like I said earlier. So I think the consumer goods industries and or those complex organizations that just can't pause the work from a risk point of view and from a license to operate point of view. So what's changed is maybe just the hiring side of things is much more targeted and operational, as I said. So you'll see more hiring of GR or human rights experts that can also inform the business. And I think that's a real sweet spot that we will often find clients are struggling with. They might find someone who's really strong on EPR and they know all about the nuances around the policy that's coming down the pipe, but they might not necessarily have the muscle that they've or the seniority or credibility or experience that's required to also influence senior decision makers in the business and the R&D teams and the design when it comes to actually procurement and that sort of thing. So deep subject matter expertise combined with the soft skills that you need at that more senior level in order to actually get decisions made and investment through as well.
It's the thought that if you're hiring at lower levels, that's the piece that will miss is that the experience of change management and leadership buy-in. And yes, you can hire someone to help you with EPR regulations and reporting and emissions, carbon accounting or the like, but that's reactive. It's the proactive pushing it up that gets missed.
Yeah.
It seems to me.
No, you're right.
Agreed.
The other bit that's interesting with that Rich and I, as you've already heard earlier, when we were offline, we both love ag tech and food tech. And I think that all the innovations that are happening in that space are just so exciting because they are by nature impactful. And there is a long-term sustainable view in terms of what their mission and goal is. So we love working with those types of organizations that are at that critical stage of growth where all of a sudden they need a new CEO or their first COO or their first CEO or CFO. So there's that C-suite requirement for these scaling organizations. So we're increasingly seeing a lot of that. And I know that's hard for classic senior executive, CSO, VP coming out of a brand or a large corporate to even consider moving to a teeny startup with the chaos that will likely ensue as well. It's a real mindset shift. But there can be a role to play there and in private equity as well. We hear about that a lot. But Yeah, I think it's about keeping an open mind in terms of the various directions could go from here, especially where you're sitting at the top or have just maybe departed from a senior executive position.
Well, and building on something that we talked about last time, because our remit is to talk about ESG comms. And so how is that showing up? How is all of this showing up in the work in comms and supply chain and procurement roles too? Like there was some accelerant happening in last season. Is that continuing? What does that mean for us building up our resumes right now? Asking for a friend.
Catherine, shall I let you start with this one?
Yeah, you're welcome to. I mean, look, when it comes to comms in particular, I would say there's not too much that's changed. You could say that the narrative is very much integrated with the data and or it follows the data. The data is leading the charge in that sense. We recently placed someone at Mars to work on their sort of sustainability comms piece in the public affairs function. That is a trend that I imagine we will continue to see, but we will also continue to see these moves into finance and risk, like I say, or supply chain and procurement or operations. So comms is one piece, and it really does depend on the business and public, private sort of entities and how risk averse they might be, et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of resumes, well, I think going back to my earlier point, it's about focusing in on function, not necessarily sustainability. So be thinking about how you articulate what you do that brings you closer to those central core business functions and to the decisions that are taken there and to budgets and P&L and forecasting and that sort of thing. So how close your work is to finance or to supply contracts and procurement or audits or operational KPIs, anything that can demonstrate the value that you can add beyond being a sustainability leader as a standalone. The other two things I would say is one is to be very clear on outcomes and impact. So particularly amongst senior executives who want to talk about how they've led the strategy and rightfully so, but it's also about how you've reduced risk or exposure to, I don't know, forced labor issues and how you've enabled compliance with X, Y, or Z. So I think it's very much about output, not that you've led the strategy necessarily. And then the final piece is just to demonstrate your cross-functional abilities. So how well you are able to work across all of these different business units in your current and previous roles. Show that you're embedded and show that you add value across the business.
Richard, do you want to add anything? You're welcome to.
I don't have much to add to that. I think when it comes to comms and stuff, I've been really focused more on like BD and product marketing and product development type roles for startups. So maybe a little less relevant for the general audience. Sustainability as a whole, it's probably the function or the topic in a business that is most far reaching. Folks working in ESG comms, folks working in sustainability manager type roles, et cetera, y'all have, I guess, your fingers in more pies than anyone else in the business, except for maybe the CEO. So there is a huge degree of skill set that goes into stakeholder management, cross-functional leadership, leading, influencing without direct responsibility that people working in this space have that's just incredibly relevant and valuable. It's just figuring out how to demonstrate that on a CV for companies or recruiters that don't necessarily know what sustainability entails.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think just to get very specific for a moment, right? We definitely have listeners who are sustainability professionals. They've been laid off or they're worried about our role. I would actually wager that probably no one is not worried about their role at this point. I think if you're not worried about your role, like that, let's talk. I'd love to hear your perspective because it feels like you're in the minority. So everyone's just like kind of consciously aware. So would just like to reflect on kind of when you meet these people, maybe in real life at a conference or even like at a dinner party or something, what are you telling them? How should they be thinking about their next move differently than they have 2 years ago? What's the kind of brass tacks advice that you're giving these folks?
it's tough. I'm going to say we do have these conversations quite a lot, especially at the moment. And, often people are asking, how do they stay in their sustainability role? But in the same breath, they're saying they're finding it quite hard. They're finding it kind of soul destroying. They are paper pushing, the passion and or the drive and the motivation, maybe you could just call it burnout, is real. And so there's this real sort of juxtaposition between wanting to hold on to your job and the job hugging piece versus feeling a bit disillusioned and a bit frustrated. And I think that might be the case for a little while. And for those of you who really do need to hold on to your role, they may feel a bit less inspiring on paper, but there's definitely ways to beef out your experience and opportunities to grow professionally where you currently are that can make you more valuable and make your role, quite frankly, harder to cut. And we've touched on these points before, but I think for those of you in role, think about how you can get closer to those business functions that we talked about earlier. And if that involves taking a job change in job title, even great. If that means also moving sideways and taking a perceived sideways step, that's also absolutely fine. I am speaking to a lot of senior level, sort of VP, even some CSO level individuals who are looking at director level roles right now, because that's frankly all they're seeing in the market. And I think I would encourage to, it depends on your situation, explore these options. There's a reason why it's called a director, and it probably would, after a quite short period of time, feel quite frustrating to anyone who's coming from a more senior strategic role, who's used to influencing the exec leadership team or the C-suite. So be thoughtful about that. I would still say don't not apply, but in conversation, I'd be very quick to establish if this role might be limiting for you, or if there may be scope to build out your role, and or they don't even know what they don't know yet, and they don't know what the role actually requires, and you can quite easily redefine that through the interview process and through your negotiation. So don't let it put you off from applying.
Yeah, that brings up another, Richard, I want to hear your thoughts, but it brings up another question to me, which I do feel like some people get very focused on the title. And really, I'm sure it can narrow, and it's good to hear people are getting more flexible. I have to imagine it is common for people to go maybe from a more senior level to director and then back up again. And I'll just note that in the last couple companies I've worked in, the term director meant very different things. And so I imagine maybe if you also are able to do a bit of storytelling about leveling, about titles, about company culture, that you can thread that needle when someone's looking at your CV and there's been some upward or downward movement.
Definitely. I think it's all about what you're able to deliver and accomplish in the role. As a recruiter, as a hiring manager, what you want to see really on a resume is this is what I did, not what my title was.
And also with these things, I'd say any of these individuals who are kind of at that point in their careers, they need to understand that we're looking for, as Richard says, that what you've done and what you've achieved. But I also think most of us know in 2026, maybe let's say in 2027, we're looking at someone's resume and it seems to be a bit of a gap. They've become a yoga teacher for 2 years. I'm hearing a lot of people just thinking about pivoting until this magical 2027 comes around, or 2028. And if I was to look at someone's resume and or they were to tell me that story, everything just went dark for a little bit. Of course, we all understand it's like COVID. Strange things happened over that time, and people have had to just take decisions that wouldn't necessarily fit with their usual career trajectory. And that's okay. But as long as you can make that clear on your LinkedIn profile or resume, we all very much understand.
It's called marketing.
We're all going through it.
You're going to do your self-marketing, right?
That's right. We have to remember who we're talking to, Catherine.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, something that has changed since we last spoke really has been the rise of AI. And so I'm wondering, is there an impact in the talent landscape in our zone here in sustainability? What's the role of AI? How is it rippling through in this world?
I feel like think about what AI can do for sustainability practitioners. As we're seeing companies hire less or shrink their sustainability teams, a lot of that work that they were doing still has to get done. And we're having to augment capacity using AI solutions, software as a service platforms, you name it. So there's been, from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of companies having success on the software side that are offering those solutions to bridge the gap, where it might have taken somebody 10 hours a week for a whole year to do this sort of work. Companies are opting for solutions that can create a dashboard or provide basic level compliance information for a couple $1,000s a year. So there's, I think, understanding how to use these AI solutions, how to optimize them, being able to implement them and save your company a bunch of money as a practitioner could be really good. At the same time, these companies that are providing the service, they need people on their team who know what is needed on the other side of the table. So that might be an opportunity to pivot, go be more commercial, be a salesperson, be a customer success person. I don't want to name names on this call, but I've seen a couple people that I connect with fairly regularly now who made that pivot from head of sustainability to chief commercial officer or head of product at some of these businesses. They're not all sort of AI first, but they're all bringing AI solutions to the table as it relates to ESG, supply chain traceability, all that stuff.
The only thing I'd add to that is I'm seeing it in my own day-to-day as well. We're all using it more. I think in the context of sustainability, it's helpful for scenario modeling, ESG data aggregation. We know that it's good for gap analysis, for example, or making your reporting much more efficient. It's great for writing that first draft, but you still need somebody at a senior level or a level who can interpret that data and see where the mistakes are being made, who can decide what really does matter materially to the business or can translate what AI is spitting out into executive or board decisions or things that are relevant to the decision makers further up the chain. So it is influencing maybe those lower level roles, perhaps, and making them more efficient. But I still think there's definitely a need for someone higher up the chain to apply a little bit of wisdom, experience to know what good looks like, and the opposite.
I agree with Catherine.
Wonderful. It's good you guys aren't fighting. That would make this a very different podcast, but you're quite agreeable. And that's why you've been invited back.
Oh,
so we're going to close with a couple questions here, but I will give you one last chance. Any kind of like advice, thoughts? I know we've gone through a lot for folks who are in the job market who are thinking, but if there's any last pearls of wisdom you want to share with those folks, and then we'll close.
Richard?
You've given so many pearls, Katie. So many pearls.
That's true.
Pearls of wisdom. That's tough. What about a silver lining? I don't know.
Perfect. Take it. Similar color palette to pearls. Go with it.
We were cautiously optimistic in season 3. Does that hold?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Is that holding?
I feel like through 2025, we've had a lot more headwinds than we did in 2023, or the last time we did this conversation. But at the same time, sometimes it's hard to be optimistic because if you're like me, your social media feed, your inbox is just drowning in alarming content and negative information. So it's hard to be optimistic for me on a daily basis. But at the same time, I'm seeing some interesting things come out. People are talking about the report out of the UK about the national security risk of biodiversity loss globally. That's contextualizing things in a way that people can't ignore. And we're seeing other things like that are being elevated. And so while it's not necessarily great news yet, and I think we're reaching our tipping point to where things are going to pick back up again. Yeah. That's what I hope.
I'm going to say it's tough. Let's acknowledge that it's tough. I think that's the most important thing, and lean on each other and be vulnerable and have these conversations, because that's the most important thing. Don't suffer alone and don't allow yourself to burn out. I think we have an amazing community of people here who we're all passionate about this cause and we all want things to grow and improve and to make impact. So keep talking to each other, keep thinking about how you can get closer to those business critical roles, as I've said already, and use this downtime to really realign with that likely future. And then think about how you can network, stay connected with a lot of your peers and maybe ex-managers, that sort of thing. I know it's exhausting, But if you can continue in conversation with your peers and cross-functional leaders within your company, if you still are in a role, not because you're chasing a new role necessarily, but you're just understanding where the pressure points might be so that you can be thinking longer term about where you might be fitting in.
Yeah, I love that point about networking. Oh, Richard, did you have one more thing to add? Go for it.
Catherine actually gave me an idea, something that I tell every candidate I talk to, and that is take an interview. Even if you're not actively looking, interviewing is not like riding a bike. It's one thing to be on the other side of the table interviewing candidates for a job that you're hiring for, but pitching yourself in that context is something that needs to be practiced, in my opinion.
100%.
So even if you're in a comfortable seat, especially given where things are at right now, keep an eye out. Take a call from a recruiter. First of all, the job might surprise you, but it's just good to stay sharp.
Take Richard's call.
Yeah, take my call. It's just good. Take these calls, pursue opportunities, even if it's more directly just applying for a job. Just see what's out there, feel it out, practice interviewing, just so you can be mindful of what's happening in the market and be sharp and ready to go when that golden opportunity comes your way.
That's great advice. And what Catherine was saying too, related to this idea of kind of network and continuing to talk to people, you could always send them this episode of the podcast and say, hey, I'm learning about the job market. I'm a little freaked out. How are you feeling? And I think just sometimes reaching out or cold calling, let's say a former colleague or someone who has successfully done this pivot can be hard, but sharing an article, a podcast, a resource that you can have a shared discussion about can be great. As someone who runs too many book clubs, I tell you, it's nice to come together around shared media.
Yeah.
And on that note of reading, we always love to ask our guests, what are you reading, watching, or listening today that's inspiring your work? So we can end on a light note. Richard, do you want to start us off?
I've got a 2-year-old, so I don't do as much reading as I used to. I think what's keeping me alive right now is just playing with my daughter, watching the Olympics, staying warm through this ice storm we just had. But what I am consuming media is through audiobook form. So it's sci-fi, speculative fiction audiobooks. I read a fun one this year that I liked called Termination Shock by Neil Stephenson. And then there's a denser one that I enjoyed, but definitely has a point of view called New York 2140 by Kim Stanley Robinson. Interesting read for sure, especially for those of us in New York or who were in New York. And then a lot of parenting content, anything I can
Good Night
get
Gorilla.
about.
That's a good one.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm reading a lot of kids' books, Good Night Room, and stuff like that. But also, I just got my hands on a new book I'm excited to read about how to raise good people, basically.
And how about you, Catherine?
You don't need a book for that, Richard.
Yeah, I know.
You know. You've got this.
Sometimes we have to validate ourselves.
Yeah, but that's exactly what you need.
True. It's true.
That's very true.
It's very true. Well, look, talking about burnout, I would probably be the first to say that I've been a little bit burnt out. I am happy to talk about that. It's been a lot. I've had a lot of calls from people looking for advice on the market, and it's kind of been a bit challenging to the point that I'm having to put some good sort of, what's the word, borders up around my work and life balance. Thank you, boundaries. So I think that's really important, which means that any reading that I do sustainability related is during the day at work. So at most you'll see me reading a post by Alison Taylor, who's just one of my favorites out there. And she does not mince her words. Some of you will know if you follow her. And Solitaire Townsend as well is just fabulous and really helps lighten the mood. And we love Andrew Winston as well for his insights. So that's probably as far as I'll have time to read any sort of thought leadership in this space that I find helpful. Really, I'm doing anything just to keep myself zen. So a friend gave me a crochet kit over the holidays. So I got slightly obsessed with that. And I'm now crocheting a scarf, which is actually just what I need. And other than that, lots of audiobooks as I walk the dog and just disconnecting a little bit of
I'm with you. I'm doing embroidery. I love it. And the best part is that I have to take my glasses off to do it. So the world just goes blank. So I can't look at anything. So the world is fuzzy except for my stitches. So I'm right there with you on the crocheting.
Nice one.
I like the fuzzy logic there.
There you go. Well, thank you guys for coming back. You are our first and only repeat guest because you're so fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It really is. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Engaging ESG. Have a question for us to consider or a strategy you'd like us to cover? Email us today at engagingesg@gmail.com.
Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Engaging ESG today. It helps us grow, and even better, be sure to share the podcast with your favorite sustainability, diversity, or social impact colleague. And until next time, keep engaging.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.